The courtroom was a veritable theater of tension where the air crackled with anticipation. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting patterns of light and shadow across the wooden benches. Each seat was filled, not just with jurors and court personnel, but with a blend of eager spectators, friends and family of both parties involved, journalists hungry for a compelling story, and curious onlookers drawn by whispered rumors of a clash between two formidable opponents. At the front of the room stood Karoline Leavitt, her posture exuding confidence as she prepared to make her case. Her reputation as a fierce advocate had preceded her, but today felt different. As she surveyed the faces before her, she sensed the weight of expectation. This was not just another routine trial, it was a pivotal moment that could define her career. Karoline had earned her place here through sheer determination and an unyielding commitment to justice. Across from her sat the arrogant lawyer, a man whose reputation for bravado often overshadowed substance. Leaning back in his chair with a smug expression, he seemed wholly unconcerned about the proceedings unfolding around him. With his tailored suit and casual air, he radiated an attitude that suggested he had every angle covered. His dismissive smirk hinted at his belief that he could easily dismantle Karoline's arguments without breaking a sweat. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared that he held all the cards in this game. As the gavel struck and the judge called for order, whispers in the gallery hushed to an expectant silence. Every eye was fixed on the front of the room where Karoline stood ready to challenge her opponent's arrogance head-on. The judge offered brief remarks about decorum and procedure before turning towards both lawyers. The atmosphere transformed into one thick with suspense, as if even time hesitated to move forward. Karoline felt a rush of adrenaline as she opened her case. With clarity and conviction, she introduced her argument, her words flowing like a stream of determined energy. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, drawn in not only by her eloquence but by an undeniable aura of authenticity surrounding her. In stark contrast, the arrogant lawyer rolled his eyes at Karoline's initial points, whispering sarcastic comments to his assistant loud enough for those nearby to hear. This only fueled Karoline's resolve. She was not there just to prove him wrong but to stand up for what was right. As each side prepared for battle, a palpable tension hung in the air, a collective breath held among everyone present. The stage was set for an unforgettable confrontation that would keep them all on the edge of their seats. Little did they know how profoundly this day would impact each participant within these hallowed walls of justice. Karoline Leavitt's journey to this moment in the courtroom was shaped by a blend of personal experience and unwavering dedication to justice. Growing up in a small town, she was exposed to the stark realities of inequality and injustice from an early age. Her father, a factory worker, often shared stories of how corporate interests overshadowed the concerns of everyday people, while her mother, a school teacher, instilled in her the importance of standing up for what is right. These formative years ignited a passion within Karoline, a desire to be the voice for those who felt powerless and unheard. Her academic achievements pushed her toward law school, where she thrived in an environment that sharpened her skills as an advocate. Known for her fierce debates and compelling arguments, Karoline quickly garnered respect among her peers and professors. Unlike many of her classmates who sought corporate law careers for financial gain, Karoline was driven by something more profound, a commitment to social justice. She participated in various volunteer programs, providing legal assistance to marginalized communities while simultaneously challenging systemic injustices within the legal framework. As she entered the world of practice, Karoline built a reputation as an assertive and tenacious attorney who was unafraid to take on powerful adversaries. Colleagues admired her ability to dissect complex legal issues with clarity while also connecting emotionally with clients. Each case she took on became a stepping stone in her mission to create fair outcomes for those who were often overlooked or underestimated. The case she faced today was particularly personal. It involved a local family that had been wronged by the very corporation represented by the arrogant lawyer seated across from her. They had lost their home due to unfair practices and deceitful negotiations, an all too familiar story for Karoline that echoed her own childhood experiences. This was not merely another case. It was an opportunity for her to effect real change and restore dignity to those who had suffered. As Karoline prepared her argument, she reflected on the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. The stakes were high, not just for herself, but also for the family counting on her advocacy. She knew that winning this case could not only provide justice for them, but also send a powerful message about accountability and integrity within the legal profession. With every bit of determination fueling her resolve, Karoline stepped forward into the spotlight, ready to dismantle the arrogance of her opponent with facts, legal acumen, and heartfelt conviction. She felt invigorated by the challenge ahead, prepared to show everyone in that courtroom what true advocacy looks like and why it matters deeply in the pursuit of justice. Across the courtroom from Karoline Leavitt sat the arrogant lawyer David Sterling, a figure who embodied self-assuredness to the point of hubris. His tailored suit, complete with a polished tie and designer shoes, exuded wealth and privilege, an exterior that perfectly matched his inflated sense of self-worth. With each passing moment, his demeanor radiated an air of superiority that felt almost palpable, as if he were sitting on a throne rather than a bench in a courtroom. David's past successes loomed large over him. Known for winning high-profile cases against individuals and organizations alike, he had built a reputation as a formidable opponent in the legal arena. However, those victories were often accompanied by whispers of unethical practices and aggressive tactics that frequently left others feeling steamrolled and unheard. Many in the legal community respected his skill, but loathed his approach. To David, the end always justified the means. As he glanced toward Karoline, a smirk crept onto his face, a condescending expression that suggested he viewed her as an inexperienced rival rather than an equal. He openly rolled his eyes at her preliminary remarks and leaned back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh, seeming to invite laughter at her expense from those seated nearby. Such antics were not merely distractions, they were strategic maneuvers intended to undermine Karoline's confidence while asserting his dominance within the room. The way he spoke was laced with sarcasm and dismissive comments directed at both Karoline and the courtroom itself. When the judge reminded him of decorum during proceedings, David's response was a nonchalant wave of his hand, as if to say that such rules did not apply to someone of his stature. "Let's not waste time on pleasantries," he quipped one day during another case, setting the tone for how he approached not just this trial, but every interaction with an air of entitlement that suggested he believed he was above reproach. His arrogance was further evidenced by how he treated the witnesses and jury members, often interrupting them mid-sentence with pointed questions designed to belittle their responses. The courtroom had seen its share of dramatic cases, but David's relentless condescension created a unique tension that many found unsettling. As he prepared to make his case against Karoline, there was a distinct sense among spectators that this confrontation was not merely about legal arguments, it was a clash of values. Little did David know that today would bring challenges unlike any he had faced before. Underestimating Karoline's resolve could prove to be a significant miscalculation, the kind that might shatter the carefully constructed illusion of invincibility he had built around himself. As the gavel struck again, signaling the official start of proceedings, the stage was set for an encounter that would test not just their legal prowess, but their very character as advocates for justice. As the courtroom settled into a tense silence, the judge called for the opening arguments. Karoline Leavitt rose from her chair, her heart pounding with adrenaline and purpose. She began by outlining the crux of her case, a family devastated by the unscrupulous actions of Sterling's corporate client, which had engaged in deceptive business practices leading to their wrongful eviction from their home. Karoline's voice carried a steady resolve as she painted a vivid picture of the family's struggles, emphasizing their vulnerability and the impact of corporate greed on ordinary lives. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, establishing eye contact with each member, This case isn't merely about legalities. It is about human dignity and the responsibility we all share in protecting one another from injustices. Her words resonated in the courtroom, encapsulating not just the facts of the case but also an emotional appeal that encouraged empathy. From across the aisle, David Sterling leaned forward with a smirk, clearly anticipating Karoline's every point. When it was his turn to speak, he rose slowly, exuding an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Leavitt's narrative is compelling," he interjected smoothly. "It lacks substance. This is a straightforward eviction case based on contractual obligations that were clearly outlined." He dismissed her emotional appeals as mere theatrics designed to manipulate the jury's sentiments. Karoline felt a surge of determination as he spoke. She knew that David often relied on his charm and sarcasm to undermine opponents rather than engage in substantive legal discourse. As he continued, he attempted to portray himself as the voice of reason amidst what he called Karoline's dramatic exaggerations. In reality, he continued, drawing exaggerated lines between legal terms and everyday life. The law protects businesses that operate within the confines of legality. But Karoline was ready for this tactic. With a sharpness that caught everyone by surprise, she countered, "Mr. Sterling may wish to hide behind legal jargon, but let us not forget that laws are meant to serve justice. It is not enough to simply adhere to them when they facilitate harm." With each point she made, she effectively reminded both him and the jury that ethical considerations should guide their decisions. The back and forth escalated as both attorneys challenged each other's assertions. David attempted to belittle Karoline's experience by questioning her qualifications and tactics, while she responded with facts and first-hand accounts that showcased his client's disregard for ethical practices. Witnesses began to shift nervously as arguments intensified, sensing their roles becoming pivotal in this legal tug-of-war. The palpable tension ignited enthusiasm among the spectators, many leaning forward in their seats as they followed every exchange. It was clear this was more than just a legal battle. It was a philosophical clash regarding accountability and morality in business practices. As both lawyers continued to challenge each other's points with mounting intensity, the jury watched intently, fully aware that this was just the beginning of a conflict that promised to reshape perceptions within that courtroom and perhaps beyond it. The stakes had been set high, and everyone could feel it. Today's verdict would carry weight far beyond these walls. As the tension in the courtroom reached a palpable peak, the turning point of the trial came when Karoline Leavitt prepared to present a piece of evidence that had been expertly hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. She had discovered through diligent research an internal email from David Sterling's corporate client that laid bare their deliberate intent to mislead and exploit vulnerable tenants. With a firm grip on the stack of documents, she could feel the weight of the moment resting heavily on her shoulders. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge earnestly, "I would like to submit Exhibit D into evidence." The judge nodded, granting her request, and attendees shifted in their seats, intrigued about what was to follow. As Karoline approached the jury with the printed email in hand, she laid out its implications clearly. "This correspondence," she began, projecting urgency and confidence, "reveals not just negligence, but a calculated decision to misrepresent key information. It was designed to confuse tenants like my clients rather than guide them towards assistance." She passed around copies for everyone to review as she continued to speak passionately about how these tactics directly contributed to her client's wrongful eviction. A quick glance at this communication shows that Mr. Sterling's client understood their actions were unethical. They knew exactly what they were doing when they chose profits over people. The room grew quiet as murmurs rippled among spectators. Even David appeared momentarily stunned by her revelation. Karoline seized the opportunity, her voice steady but powerful. "Imagine receiving this letter if you were in my client's shoes, a heartfelt plea from a family facing homelessness made confusing by corporate jargon and deceitful assurances. This is not just a violation of contract, it is a violation of human dignity." Her words resonated deeply, striking at the heart of what had truly been lost amid legal battles: empathy and justice. Hesitation began to erode David's confident facade as he struggled to regain composure. His earlier dismissiveness swiftly evaporated under attack from evidence that clearly countered his narrative. As he leaned forward on his desk with an aggressive posture intended to intimidate Karoline as she spoke, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood tall. In times where everyone expects corporations to prioritize their bottom line above ethical responsibility, we must remember that laws were created as safeguards against such abuses, Karoline added resolutely. By asserting accountability not just for individuals but for businesses too, she effectively shifted momentum back into her favor. The courtroom atmosphere transformed. Skepticism towards Sterling rose as murmurs intensified among jurors, absorbing every detail of Karoline's compelling argument interlaced with undeniable evidence. This pivotal moment had begun reshaping opinions right before their eyes. The scales of justice felt like they were tilting significantly away from corporate arrogance and toward genuine advocacy for human rights. In these brief yet impactful moments, Karoline had not only presented evidence but also framed the case within a moral context that rendered it impossible for jurors to ignore the implications beyond mere legalities. The sound of shuffling papers coupled with whispered discussions filled the air. This trial was rapidly becoming more than just words exchanged. It was evolving into a proclamation calling for accountability and change within a broken system. As Karoline Leavitt pressed forward in her rebuttals, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, captivated by her unexpected brilliance and unwavering resolve. The tension that had previously filled the room began to morph into a palpable sense of admiration and respect for Karoline's tenacity. Jurors exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from neutrality to intrigue as they absorbed the weight of her arguments. One juror, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, nodded slowly as she processed the implications of the evidence presented. The once doubtful expressions on their faces softened. It was clear that Karoline's ability to connect the dots between corporate malfeasance and human suffering had struck a chord deep within them. Each time she emphasized the victim's plight, they seemed more engaged and empathetic. The court staff, too, were visibly affected by her performance. The bailiff, accustomed to the usual courtroom theatrics, found himself leaning against the wall with an impressed expression. The stenographer's fingers hesitated over the keys as she caught herself hanging on every word. This was not just another case but a moment that felt significant. Even members of the jury who had been skeptical of Karoline at the outset now appeared to be reconsidering their initial judgments. As David Sterling attempted to regain control of the narrative with his usual bravado, a subtle shift occurred among the spectators. His condescending remarks began to fall flat, stifled by a rising tide of support for Karoline that was almost tangible. Whispers started circulating among those present. Many were expressing disbelief at how effectively she had dismantled Sterling's arguments. "Did you hear how she turned that around?" one spectator murmured to another, who nodded in agreement, clearly impressed by her skillful handling of what had been an uphill battle. Karoline's calm demeanor amidst Sterling's bluster only served to heighten her appeal. She maintained eye contact with jurors and spectators alike, inviting them into her narrative while challenging them to consider the broader implications of justice and fairness. Each time she referenced the internal email revealing corporate deception, gasps rippled through the courtroom. Her revelations were landing hard, and it was evident that even those who initially sided with Sterling were beginning to waver. The judge watched intently, sensing that this trial was evolving beyond mere legal arguments. It was becoming a moral reckoning within these walls. As Karoline concluded her rebuttal with a passionate plea for justice, silence enveloped the room before a wave of murmurs broke out again, reverberating with approval and solidarity for her cause. In that moment, it became clear, Karoline Leavitt had not only challenged an arrogant lawyer, but also inspired a collective awakening among everyone present, a realization that this case mattered deeply because it represented something larger than themselves. Accountability in a world often dominated by indifference. As the gavel struck for a brief recess, anticipation hung in the air. All eyes were on Karoline as she walked back to her seat, knowing she had made an indelible mark on this trial, and perhaps on the hearts and minds of those who would ultimately decide its outcome. The climax of tension in the courtroom reached its peak during a particularly heated exchange between Karoline Leavitt and David Sterling. After a series of powerful arguments from Caroline, Sterling, visibly rattled by her success, stood up to challenge her with renewed intensity. The courtroom murmured as he approached the jury, his tone dripping with condescension. "Miss Leavitt may have captured your emotions," he began, voice steady yet mocking. "But let us not forget that this case is rooted deeply in the law, not in sentimentality." He gestured dramatically, his polished demeanor attempting to regain the upper hand. "You cannot base your verdict on pity for these individuals. Laws exist for a reason, and they must be upheld, no matter how heart-wrenching the story may seem." Caroline felt a surge of anger at his blatant dismissal of human suffering. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she looked directly at the jury members who had begun to show signs of agitation at Sterling's arrogance. "And what does it say about our legal system?" she countered, voice rising with fervor. "If we uphold laws that allow corporations to exploit the vulnerable simply because they can, shouldn't justice also reflect our shared humanity?" The tension escalated dramatically with each exchange, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Caroline's words rang out like a clarion call. Silence ensued. Momentarily after she spoke, the weight of her argument hanging heavy in the air, the spectators could feel the electricity between the two attorneys. It was not just a legal battle, but a clash of moral beliefs. David attempted to intimidate her further. "This isn't about morality. This is about legality," he shouted, his bravado cracking slightly under her unwavering stance. The arrogance that usually defined him began to falter as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. Caroline stepped closer to him, her voice calm yet filled with passion. "And isn't it precisely this rigid adherence to legality, without consideration for ethics, that leads to injustice?" Her words challenged not only David's arguments but also resonated deeply with everyone present, the jurors shifting uncomfortably in their seats, spectators whispering among themselves about the importance of balancing law with compassion. In that moment, something shifted in the crowded room. The audience's earlier admiration for Caroline transformed into a palpable solidarity. They were leaning deeply into her arguments about justice and humanity. As she spoke fervently about the ramifications of corporate greed on real people's lives, the families affected by systemic injustice, David began gesturing wildly to reclaim the stage, but his frantic attempts fell flat against Caroline's poised conviction. As their confrontation reached fever pitch, moments passed like hours. An abrupt silence fell upon the courtroom when Caroline made a final statement that encapsulated everything she had fought for. "Justice should not be an abstract notion reserved for those who can afford it. It must be accessible and humane." The gravity of her words hung in the air as all eyes locked onto both lawyers. Everyone processed what had just occurred, a realization dawning that amidst legal posturing and aggressive tactics lay profound questions about ethics and responsibility. In that critical moment of silence, it became clear Caroline's ideals of justice had resonated deeply enough to sway hearts and minds in ways that had previously seemed impossible against such formidable arrogance. As the trial drew to a close, both Karoline Leavitt and David Sterling prepared to deliver their final statements. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Spectators leaned forward, eager to hear how this intense legal battle would culminate. Caroline took a deep breath as she rose to summarize her case, her presence commanding the room. She began by reiterating the plight of the family at the heart of this trial, reminding everyone of the emotional and ethical stakes involved. "This case is not just about legality," she asserted, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is about the very fabric of our society, about whether we will stand by and allow corporations to trample over the most vulnerable among us." She recounted the evidence presented, particularly the internal email that had unveiled the corporate client's intent to deceive. "Let us not forget that these documents are more than just words on a page. They represent real lives affected by wrongdoing." Caroline's eyes scanned the jury, ensuring they felt the weight of her words. I urge you to consider not merely what is lawful, but what is just. Justice must be accessible and humane. It cannot be reserved for those who can afford it. With each word, Karoline built a compelling case for accountability, underscoring that true justice requires more than adherence to legal technicalities. It demands an unwavering commitment to ethics and compassion. Her passionate plea resonated throughout the courtroom, igniting a renewed sense of purpose among spectators and jurors alike. When it was David Sterling's turn, he stood with an air of bravado that felt increasingly hollow in contrast to Karoline's authenticity. He launched into his summation, attempting to recapture his earlier dismissive tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Miss Leavitt may have swayed you with emotion, but remember, this is about upholding the law." His voice was steady, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of desperation. He sought to frame the case as a matter of legality, devoid of sentimentality, painting Karoline's appeals as mere theatrics. However, as Sterling continued, his arguments began to falter against the backdrop of Karoline's impassioned presentation. The jury's expressions revealed their growing discontent with his attempts to undermine what had become clear, that justice transcends mere legal adherence. With his final remarks, Sterling insisted that their verdict should reflect legal principles rather than emotions. Yet as he concluded, a palpable shift had occurred in the courtroom, a realization that morality and legality must intertwine for genuine justice to prevail. As the tension in the room built toward its climax, Karoline confidently stepped closer to the jury once more. "In your hands lies not just a verdict, but an opportunity to define what justice truly means in our society," she declared, her voice unwavering. "Do not let fear or complacency dictate your decision. Stand up for what is right." With those powerful words echoing in the courtroom, silence enveloped the room as everyone processed the weight of her concluding statements. It was clear Karoline Leavitt had not only articulated a strong legal argument, but had also encapsulated a moral victory over her adversary, igniting hope for accountability in a system often marred by indifference. As the gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the conclusion of the proceedings, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Spectators slowly began to rise, voices hushed in conversation as they processed the dramatic events that had unfolded. Many turned their attention to Karoline Leavitt, whose performance had captivated everyone present. Whispers filled the room about her ability to challenge David Sterling's arrogance and present a compelling case for justice. "Can you believe how she handled him?" a young woman remarked to her friend, admiration evident in her voice. "She never backed down, even when he tried to intimidate her." Others nodded in agreement, echoing sentiments about Karoline's confidence and poise under pressure. It was clear that she had earned not just respect but genuine admiration from those who had witnessed her battle for justice. Jurors exchanged thoughtful glances, their expressions revealing the weight of their responsibility ahead. They had been captivated by Karoline's passionate narratives and ethics-driven arguments. A middle-aged man leaned closer to his fellow juror and murmured, "I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but she really made me think about what justice means beyond just legalities." Her profound statements on morality intertwined with law had clearly struck a chord among them. In stark contrast, David Sterling felt the impact of this trial's outcome settling over him like a shroud. He stood with an air of defiance as he observed the reactions around him but couldn't shake off the feeling that he had underestimated Karoline's ability to resonate with not just jurors but everyone present. Across various corners of the courtroom, attendees whispered concerns about his assertion that law should be devoid of sentimentality, a belief increasingly challenged by what they had heard during the trial. The judge gathered his papers, wrapping up administrative details while reflecting on Karoline's significant contributions. Even he had been impressed by her clarity and resolve throughout proceedings. After all, it was not every day that legal minds collided with such fierce conviction in advocating for human dignity. As spectators began to file out of the courtroom, conversations buzzed about predictions regarding the verdict. Many speculated that Karoline's arguments would heavily influence jury deliberations. A group of journalists gathered outside with tapes rolling and pens ready. They sensed this case might lead to more than just a legal decision. It could spark broader discussions about corporate ethics. Karoline exited the courtroom with an inner calm despite knowing that uncertainties regarding the verdict lingered. She turned towards members of her extended community who came to support her throughout this process as they flooded around her with hugs and congratulations. Meanwhile, cheers spread across their faces. Her fight for justice wasn't over yet. It could merely be beginning. In that moment outside those courthouse doors, amidst laughter and shared support from allies who understood what was at stake, not just for one family, but for many, the sense remained unmistakable. Hope had ignited people's spirits through one fierce determination against systemic injustice. As anticipation for the jury's decision loomed just beyond reach, everyone carried forward an undeniable momentum toward change, a realization fueling both optimism and action for what lay ahead in matters far beyond these walls. The courtroom showdown between Karoline Leavitt and David Sterling served as a powerful illustration of several key life lessons centered around confidence, perseverance, and the importance of standing up against arrogance in any competitive environment. Karoline's journey through the trial exemplified how an unwavering belief in oneself can act as a formidable weapon against even the most intimidating opponents. Despite the odds stacked against her, she displayed remarkable composure, driven by her commitment to justice and her client's plight. Throughout the trial, Karoline demonstrated that confidence is not just about self-assuredness, it is also about having the resolve to challenge injustices, even when faced with overwhelming opposition. Her ability to articulate her arguments with clarity and passion resonated deeply with the jury and spectators alike. This was particularly evident during her powerful rebuttals, where she seamlessly combined legal knowledge with a heartfelt appeal for human dignity. In essence, she turned her vulnerability into strength, showing that authenticity can captivate and persuade far more than mere bravado. Perseverance was another vital theme that emerged from this courtroom drama. Karoline faced numerous challenges throughout the proceedings, from David Sterling's condescending remarks to the legal complexities of corporate deceit. Yet, rather than retreating in the face of adversity, she pressed on with relentless determination. Her journey reminded everyone present that setbacks and confrontations are an inherent part of any competitive environment. What matters most is how one responds. Karoline's refusal to yield under pressure exemplified that true strength lies in resilience and the courage to continue advocating for what is right. Additionally, this case underscored the significance of standing up against arrogance. David Sterling's dismissive attitude served as a stark reminder of how arrogance can lead to ethical blindness. Throughout the trial, his attempts to belittle Karoline only highlighted her composure and belief in her cause. The courtroom dynamic shifted as it became clear that those who assume superiority often overlook their own weaknesses. Karoline's success was not merely a personal triumph, it signified a collective stand against a culture that prioritizes power over compassion. As the dust settled after the trial, it was evident that Karoline's performance had ignited a spark of change not just within the courtroom but beyond its walls. It served as a rallying cry for those who might feel marginalized or intimidated by those in positions of power. The lessons learned from this confrontation emphasized the importance of believing in oneself, maintaining resilience in adversity, and challenging arrogance wherever it may manifest. In summary, the courtroom battle between Karoline and David encapsulated a profound journey of growth and empowerment, an inspiring reminder that standing firm in one's convictions can pave the way for justice in an often indifferent world. This trial left an indelible mark on everyone present, reinforcing the notion that true advocacy is grounded in humanity, integrity, and unwavering determination to champion what is right. As attendees reflected on these themes, it was clear that Karoline Leavitt's influence would extend far beyond this singular case, inspiring others to find their own voices and fight for change within their communities.